how do you say, literature space. So we used that for all our poetry readings, book launches. So audience can start signing in, right?
Yes, now they can.
Let's wait.
Once we formally start up, Harish, you can paste in Dr. Patel's biography in the chat, please.
Yes.
Yeah, once audience join. We'll wait. How many people have totally signed in, Harish?
32, if I'm not wrong.
All the 3 ladies who asked, you send them the links, right?
Sure.
All right, I'm signing off, as in like switching off my video and audio since the audiences are coming in. If you need something, just holler at me. Have a good session, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, I was distracted because I was posting pictures, took a screenshot post to Twitter and to Facebook to encourage people to come in. Hey, we have an audience member. Hi, Siddhartha Menon. How are you doing?
Can I type an answer to Siddharth Menon?
Sure.
So I click on chat, is it?
Yes. And it should say below all panelists, and it will give you a choice of all panelists and attendees. So you should choose all panelists and attendees. So then it will be visible to Siddharth and whoever else is logged in.
Yeah, type message here.
Type message. Okay.
All panelists.
Okay. Yeah.
Keep it short so you don't have to type.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself using much social media, Dr. Patel?
I'm good with email. That's about all.
Fair enough. So you don't use things like Facebook and all that?
No.
Okay. A certain amount of fun to it. My aunt, who is in her 90s now, took to it a lot, but is now in a care facility where it's not as easy in California. And the problem there is getting enough people to be, she's not been able to really get the handle of using stuff on her phone or a tablet. She had taught herself to use a computer.
Right.
Never took to the smartphone.
Right.
Now not as doesn't do it as much, but she's like 92 now, and
Okay.
she was doing it till very recently.
Oh, Sid can't see my message.
Yeah, because you had addressed it to all panelists.
Yes.
You should address it to all panelists and attendees, which is if you click just above the message box.
Oh.
So you will then see an option to send it to all panelists and attendees.
Okay.
For now, I'll just copy paste your message to
thank you.
Sid so you can see it.
Thank you.
Hey, Mustansir, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Musti is also on. He was reading last week.
Who?
Mustansir Dalvi.
Right.
It was a lovely session you all had last Saturday. In fact, just after the Prakriti session, I logged in the one which Philip was hosting, Philip Nicolai.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Lovely session.
Yeah, it was very lovely. Yes.
There was a lot of technical problems right at the beginning, so it started very late.
Yes.
It was very nice.
Yeah, no, it took off very well.
Hey, Ranveer.
Hey, guys.
How are you doing?
Good evening. Hi, Gieve.
Hi, Ranveer. How are you?
Very well. So wonderful to see you after so long.
After a decade, I think.
Yes, little more than that, actually.
More than that.
You're looking well, which
Thank
is
you.
good to see.
Thank you.
Peter, are we waiting a bit for more people or what's the plan?
Yeah, we will start. I guess we'll start up now.
Okay, I'm just going to go on silent then.
All right.
So we have better connectivity.
All right. Harish, you started recording? Oh, yes, you have. Thanks. Cool. Right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Poetry with Prakriti. Poetry, let me tell you a little bit about the Prakriti Foundation first. It's an arts and culture NGO. It's based in Chennai and was founded in 1998. And it's a space where creative people and people who like to interact with creative people and artists can meet on multiple platforms and engage with each other seriously. Prakriti runs a number of festivals in Chennai and elsewhere. Poetry with Prakriti is one of its annual festivals. Usually it happens in Chennai, where poets from India and abroad, 2 dozen poets over a couple of weeks, read at multiple locations all over Chennai, ranging from the usual kind of things like bookshops and art galleries and Harish is back. So Harish, can you resume your recording? I just started recording as a backup myself. Just give me a thumbs up when you've started recording again, Harish. All right. So let's, and yeah, so Poetry with Prakriti, instead of being in its usual avatar, which is live in Chennai in multiple locations, decided to take the festival online. And since October, every weekend, or rather the first 3 Saturdays of every month, there's been a different poet, each one reading their work, having a little conversation with a moderator, and then throwing the session open to the audience to ask questions. Harish will paste in the formal biography for our guests today. But very briefly, I will tell you that Dr. Gieve Patel is not just a poet, as you would expect because you're here for Poetry with Prakriti, but also a playwright, an artist, and until somewhat recently, a practicing physician. And he has mixed these various practices and in a productive life. His first book of poetry and his first art collection were in 1966. Since then, he has been someone who's been this gentle figure in Bombay Poetry Circle, the Indian poetry community at large. I've had the privilege of hearing him read his poetry several times, and delighted to be able to bring Dr. Patel to all of you.
I have divided my reading into sections, and these sections are artificial, but they're important because they give a structure to the evening. Poems happen on their own. Uh, Sometimes, I'm concerned with a medical experience. Sometimes I'm concerned with something I see on the street. But for the purpose of this evening, uh, um, I'm giving you 3 to 4 poems in each section. And the first section that I'll talk about is medical poems. These are poems that have been written as part of my experience as a practitioner in rural and in urban India. And the first poem, which will give a which will take us straight into this medical experience, is called Public Hospital. How soon I've acquired it all. It would seem an age of hesitant gestures awaited only this sententious month. Autocratic poise comes natural now. Voice sharp, glance impatient, a busy man's look of harried preoccupation. Not embarrassed to appear so. My fingers, deaf to maneuver bodies, pull down clothing, strip the soul, give sorrow ear up to a point, then snub it shut, separate essential from suspect tales, weed out malingerers, accept with patronage a steady stream of the underfed, pack flesh in them, then pack them away. Almost, I tell myself, I embrace the people, revel in variety of eye, color, cheek, bone. Unwelcome guest, I may visit bodies, touch close, cure, throw overboard necessities of distance, plunge, splice, violate, with needle, knife, and tongue, wreck all my bonds in them. At end of the day, from under the flagpole, watch the city streaming by the side of my hands. So you will have gathered that for me, and I'm sure for most medical practitioners, being a doctor is not a simple, straightforward, idealistic thing that it is made out to be. You know, a wonderful, wise man doing good things all around. It's a complex thing. You know, you're interacting with all kinds of things, and some of your best impulses and some of your most questionable impulses all come to play. And I've tried to preserve these in this set of poems. So the second poem is called Catholic Mother, and it is subtitled Your Child at Hospital. And here you will have the beginning of something that I experience again and again as a doctor, which is a nagging sense of helplessness when you come across situations where you know you will not be able to help. She's the youngest of three, you said. She's always been so sickly. And you smiled. The child responded but turned shyly away. We were all three barely perturbed. And so you were trustful, open, not alien to objects, touching cups, bottles, her hair, shared by the sunlight that was breaking over the weeds, and peaceful that your child was breathing in the quiet afternoon dazzle. But then, when it struck, when her eyes began to paper and drugs were ineffective, the room recoiled, and I saw you become private before relations could come to join into your pain. I can see that your people have more right to you now than I. Aunts and uncles will be closer. But before I let you leave, pious woman, your weeping soft, unrebellious, from what perverseness do I oppose for you your simple, original trust before the present horror? And two short poems where this helplessness is more marked and acquires something like black humor, anger, mock, a tone of mocking, uh, you know, when you're cornered and you feel that all your good intentions are going to get you nowhere. The poem is called Slummy Story. This corpulent and epileptic girl, mortally dim, miraculously married, impregnated within days. Now I am summoned to watch her convulsions, Each time the husband escorts a spare cousin in her place to the fairs. And rural. This body rattles in my hand as I prod it to reach nooks and crannies. Puzzled old man whose list of complaints punctuates my cursory look over. Whatever to do for you, but lay you out like a child's game of sticks and colored paper, then string you and shoot you up and across the sky and augur over trees to frighten the life out of dying. And I end this section with a poem which is not strictly speaking a medical poem, but it is a poem about healing with a capital H. And I think that with this poem, I move out of the area of self doubt and rage into into a perhaps a saner atmosphere. The poem was written after a rereading of the New Testament, and therefore, had the sense of the healer with the capital H, and it is about the interaction between the healer and the healed, in the widest sense of the word. And the poem is called "The Multitude Comes to a Man." The multitude comes to a man when he acquires the power to heal. Slowly, the multitude comes, dragging its heel. What can the multitude want as I join it to visit the man who can heal? The multitude sees its own power accumulate before the healing man and exchanges willingly power for power. I'm going to read you three poems which have the imagery of the tree, which is a very important imagery for me. But in each poem, it serves a different function. And so, the first poem is called Aegis, the Greek word aegis, also the English word, which means under the influence of, under the protection of, under the shadow of, and is really just an experience of myself sitting under a tree, lying down under a tree. The poem took me 12 years to complete because I just couldn't get the right tone for it and what it was that the poem was leading me towards. And so I allowed it its time. And I think that finally it did reach a point where I felt, okay, now this is as far as I can go. And I'm happy with what I've got. Aegis. I lie an hour under this tree's shade. The time is the height of summer. The earth is worked ready for rain. The clogs are large, uneven. Not one straw in the field, say nothing of my racked human frame, rests calm and level. I'm a ship with crazy joints, passive to the ups and downs of a plowed ocean. My heels pierced through, shoulders stabbed by stubble, head flung far back, earth fault for a pillow, allows the cranium a full free fall, tilting the gaze upward into the tree's blazing crown. Quietly, leaves mediate, straining away sunlight. Earth-hard hammock of my choosing did not bargain for this vision gratis. The arching crown of this tree of middling height sways over me, the alternate hissing and silence inaudible almost hiss or whisper of near words to lull me to a quiet, a calm. Should my spirit chill to a fearful premonition of this vision's true intention. One more poem. One stones them and their fear is diminished. But they do halt even so, some feet away. Those few feet, the object of my wonder. Do I emit currents at close quarters? Are those the few feet I would keep from a tame tiger? Is there a hierarchy then of distances that must be observed? And non observance would at once agglutinate all of nature into a messy, inextricable mass? Ah, Daphne, passing from woman to foliage, did she for a moment sense all vegetable sap as current of her own bloodstream, the green flooding into the red? And when she achieved her final arboreal being, shed dewy tears each dawn for that lost, fleeting moment, that hint at freedom in transit between cage and cage. And the last poem on trees, with the tree imagery, is called A Variation on Saint Teresa. The first line of the poem is a quotation from Saint Teresa's autobiography. I'm talking of Saint Teresa of Avila, uh, who was a very, very disturbed young woman, neurotic, troubled, and who worked her way to her own salvation through her spiritual growth. And there's this amazing line in the biography which goes, when you withdraw only a little way from me, I immediately fall to the ground. And that line, I just found it so moving, that anybody should think of the universe or of the divinity as totally controlling their lives completely, so that the person himself or herself has no will, and that every moment, every breath taken is because of the presence of this higher being, or because of the strings that he holds. And the poem then investigates this line, and tries to find its way around. A variation on Saint Teresa. Whenever you withdraw only a little way from me, I immediately fall to the ground. I wait upon the strings you hold. In this equation, whatever to make of love and of any independent performance of a glorious kind, my limbs at best may be infused by an outer force. And so, inconsolably, I await your storms, screaming seas, ripping gales, clouds tumbled across the mouths of valleys, spewing lightning, with trees shaken like rattles in a child's fist. These then at last do move me. Yes, I am moved. Indeed, I am. I am. This is a standalone poem by itself. It's called Public Works. It's an urban poem. It began as a fantasy when I wrote it in 1970. When I read it today, it doesn't read like a fantasy. It reads like something that's real. And it is about the presence of the sea all around the city of Bombay, where I live, where I was born and where I have grown up. And my feeling in the 1970s of how the sea felt threatened and what it might do to retaliate. So you will see how my 1970 fantasy, how real it sounds today as something that could just happen tomorrow. Public works. The city gives you the sea through slats of buildings, dikes to curb water's power. A massive chain forged by builders, slicing the ocean down to blue ribbons. All walls against water. Element made diminutive in its sewage trickle between my legs. As a child, I had a vision of the island city sinking by a rush of waves from sea, creek, lake. The taps in each little household bursting in sympathy with the revolt. Now, taming is here. Unless I recount the humid fume that yesterday for 2 hours invested such varied objects. The fur of lap dogs. Sorry. Yeah, that yesterday for 2 hours invested such varied objects. The fur of lap dogs clinging fast to their bodies. the sheen of furniture tarnished by mist, polished chrome crashing down in rust heaps, and fireplaces all over the city choking in wetness, electric grills losing their orange glow, kerosene stoves expiring with a hiss, the ashes of coal fires, pasty and dark, turning inward to quench the coals. Then again today at peak traffic hour, the double-decker bus that turned over, releasing such torrents from stab wounds. Water, virginal, from what conduits no one knew, as a crowd gathered, wading through slush around the wrecked, mangled monster. Peter, do I have about 10 minutes? Okay.
Would you like to perhaps break a little now to
I'm
give people
sorry?
a chance to take?
No, I'm sorry.
We're at about we're at about 25 minutes in. We could perhaps break now, have a little chat, and then do a few more poems after this, or would you like to continue? Whichever.
No, I think maybe that's a good idea. Or would you like me to finish the poem so we can, we know what to chat about? Or do you think you
Sure.
have enough? What do you feel?
So let's work backwards from who we have a small gathering today. I'm not sure how many questions will come up. So perhaps we'll just have a small chat right now, and then throw it open, and based on the number of, and then come back, and I'll keep 10 minutes at the end so that that we can end with poems, which I always think is a lovely way to end.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, so perhaps we could spend, as I said at the beginning, to those who've come in after I started the session, Gieve Patel has combined several art practices, poetry. He's a playwright. He is an artist who's exhibited at many times, and he is a physician, and until recently a practicing physician. And my first question to you then is, how is it to balance these very many facets of yourself in every which way? All of these were public facing. As a doctor, you have patients. As a poet, you have readers and listeners, and artists, you have viewers who come into, and all of these are engage different parts of your brain, of course, but time as well. For a medical student, which is I would gather when you started writing, and as a doctor, you would have many demands on your time. So how is it balancing these aspects of you?
Management of time is something that I took on as something very important right at the beginning. When I started my medical practice, I was working morning, evening, and so I would do my writing in the early mornings, get up real early, and then go to the clinic, and then I'd come back for lunch home, have a 15-minute nap, and do my painting. And then I would go back to the clinic in the evening. And I guess at that age, I had the energy to do all this. A few years, about a decade down, I started I I started attending my clinic in the evenings only, with the proviso that my patients had my telephone number, and they had a right to phone me at any time of day or night, so that I could do my writing and my painting through the day, and I'd spend a substantial number of hours in the evening at the clinic.
Okay. And the playwriting practice, I mean, in that sense, is writing a whole play would be something that would occupy continuous time over a period. It's not something, say, I mean, a poem, if you're lucky, could be something that you would spend an afternoon on. Though you have said here that there was one poem that took 12 years for you to find the right words. But let us say that, say, putting the idea for a poem and say putting a first draft on it down could probably be an afternoon's work, or in even a few minutes really to get it going, and then you may come back to it. But the playwright thing is like structuring an entire performance is a rather much larger enterprise in terms of time.
Yeah, you're quite right, Peter. Uh, I think I've been helped by a certain aspect of temperament, which is that I work in very short snatches of time. Like I don't, I very rarely sit down and work continuously at something for 2 hours, 3 hours. It's generally anything like between 10 minutes to half an hour, at most an hour or two on some occasions. And so what happens is that I do that little bit of work and I put it away. And then I come back to it the next day, the week after, maybe a month later, and I pick it up again and carry on where I left off. And it's been fortunate that I never lose lose the train of thought. I never lose the 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 impulse or the moment of passion that impelled this particular act in the first place.
In a way that sounds to me, it just struck me, it sounds to me like the way a doctor deals with his patients. You have to be 100% involved at the time you're seeing the patient, but then you put it away and you go on to the next patient and the next, because you're seeing multiple patients. But at the same time, you do have patients over a long period of time. So when a new patient, I mean, when an old patient comes in, you immediately know that person's past, their vices, their strengths and weaknesses, and you come back and you pick up, as a good doctor, you pick up from there, informed by their past.
That's very well put, Peter. Thank you.
We have a question from KK Muthi about practice, but it's also somewhat close to what my next question was going to be. So I'll read KK Muthi's question first, which was one who's asking, what does your creative process look like? That we have answered to some extent when you talked about how you approach work. And how should one learn writing poetry formally? Things like meter, etc., is what KK Muthi asks. I'm going to combine this with a question that is about, you had a relationship with the Rishi Valley School, where you would conduct poetry workshops for young people, for students, school children, right? It's immensely rewarding to interact with poetry with kids. And I would like to ask you then about the way that you, in that sense, catalyzed poetry from these young people. What did you teach them in terms of what they should know in terms of writing poetry? And I'm very interested also because the best teachers are also amazing learners. So what did this teach you?
Oh, that's several questions.
Yes. I'm
to
sorry
begin-
if I bundled too much into one.
yeah, no. How does one learn the technique of poetry, meter, etc.? I think very early on, I put myself through a certain drill that every day I must write a sonnet, or every day I must, write a poem in a certain kind of strict form. The poem doesn't have to be good, and most often wasn't. These are things that are just done like a riyaz. you know,
Yes.
and you discard them. I think I did this for several years, and then at a certain point, I think I stopped. And I think I also came to realize that much as I love very formal poetry, I don't have the talent for it. That my own poetic output tends to be free verse. And so I continue to develop that. What's more, I love good rhymed poetry, but I'm terrible at rhyming myself. So I think that's also something that I had to face and acknowledge. And so I don't rhyme. I don't rhyme. The second part of the question, Rishi Valley School and the students. It's a great, great experience. And I've worked with students from age 7, no, not sorry, class 7, which would mean age 13 to age 17 or 18 in the 12th. And with each age group, I have exposed them to great poetry from all over the world, but poetry very carefully selected so that that particular age group would find it accessible. So for the 13-year-olds, I would I would expose them to short Chinese poems, which are full of suggestive imagery and suggestive feeling. For the 15-year-olds, I would expose them to slightly tougher things like Francois Villon, a 14th century French poet who talks about the hanging of thieves. And then we could talk about some such things as violence in poetry and how to moderate it and what to think about it. To the 17, 18-year-olds, where I could talk about love poetry and I could talk about what makes a poem a great poem as opposed to a good poem, and they'll be in a position to understand it, and so on. What have I learned from all of them? I have learned very difficult to articulate, but I've experienced tremendous warmth, both coming from them to me and going from me to them. I've experienced how wonderful it is when somebody is attentive to what you are speaking and when you are attentive to what they have to tell you. It is this human exchange, at a level, at a very important level, because good poetry is talking to you at a place which is very deep and very vital. And to be able to communicate with people of that age, at that level, was a great privilege. Besides which, just to stand before a class of young people and see the wonderful faces, I mean, I just knocks me down.
And again, perhaps going to another element of your creative practice, uh, there are people who believe, for instance, that a poem is best read on the page. There are people who are great performers of their poetry. There are also people, for instance, who combine poetry with other arts. And you have the thing of visual poetry where poem and artwork can go together. As someone who is a practicing artist and a practicing poet, aside from your many other skills, have you found yourself creating works that have both poetry and art in them? Or do you find that your mind finds one way to express something, but another way to express something else? Or how do you ever combine these things?
No, I don't combine these. Uh, uh, I think also something that I understood about myself very early on, which is that I'm not a multimedia man. I think it is possible to do wonderful things multimedia, but I'm sorry to say this, but most often I find it disastrous.
Okay.
I think very rarely will you come across an artist like William Kentridge, the South African artist, who's a great, fantastic artist, who can combine visuals, moving images, sound, and give you something amazing.
Mhm.
I can't. I need to concentrate on the purity of each of these media
Okay.
and work through that.
All right. We have a couple of specific questions. Both are from Siddhartha Menon. The first one, my question about how a poet chooses to refer to himself in a poem. More precisely, in some of the wry medical poems, you refer to yourself as you, whereas in the Saint Teresa poem, you conclude, yes, I am moved. Any thoughts on how a poet chooses between you and I in referring to himself?
Yeah, thank you, Siddharth. That's wonderful. Uh, 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 in the medical poems, I think that while I'm talking about myself, I'm aware that what I'm going through would also have been experienced by my colleagues. And so I can use a broader you to cover both myself and them. When I'm talking about the Saint Teresa in the Saint Teresa poem, I'm really talking about a very personal moment. And so I say I.
And the second question from this is sorry, this I misread earlier. They were not both from Siddhartha. This is from Siddharth. Siddharth Sarin asks, Give, you're also a sculptor. And listening to your Daphne poem, I was reminded of your tryst with Eklavya as well. Could you please reflect on your experience with sculpting some years ago?
Thank you, Sid. Thank you. Um, in 2007, Shalini Shahani, who's the gallerist of Guild Gallery in Mumbai, hosted me at a foundry in Jaipur and said, would I create an exhibition of sculptures for her? Now, Shalini had been talking to me for at least 5 years prior to this, asking me to do sculptures, and I had said I would like to, but it wasn't simple because making sculpture, is a big job. You require assistance, you require a foundry, you require technology, and all that. So when Shalini finally took me actually bodily to Jaipur and planted me in a foundry, I had everything I wanted. I was there for initially about 2 weeks, and I thought, and I'd never done sculpture before, and I thought that at the end of 2 weeks I might perhaps would come out with 3 works. Something very strange happened. The moment I touched the clay and started modeling, I found that the, the sculpture started flowing, one after the other. And within, like half an hour, I would produce a sculpture and pass it on to my assistants for casting, which is something very rare for me, because almost everything else that I do, poem, plays, painting, I'm very, very slow. I'm extremely slow. And this was crazy. At the end of 2 weeks, I had done 19 sculptures and I couldn't believe it. And then, of course, I went a second time and did a few more. And those sculptures, again, earlier on when I went, I was not very sure what I would work on. But slowly, I focused on two themes. Ekalavya and Daphne.
Mhm.
Ekalavya is from the Mahabharata, we all know, the tribal prince who loses his thumb and forever his possibility as an archer, a field where he wanted to excel. Daphne, who loses her womanhood and becomes a tree in order to escape a rape. But it is hardly a fate that she would have found necessarily wonderful.
Yes.
And so you have two examples of people who have had to give up something
Mhm.
because of external pressures of the kind of things that they have had to face. Although when I was doing the sculpture, I was not really focused on that. I was really focused on the physicality of thing, of the fact that I had to portray again and again this hand without a thumb.
Yes.
And I had to portray again and again this female form which is bursting into leaves.
Yes. Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, yeah. No, and one tiny aspect of what you said just now, you said you talked about handing over to your assistants the sculptures. So with your writing and with your painting, you are there from start to finish. The finished product is entirely you. Uh, of course, one may work with an editor. You may have a viewer whose views you trust. But in this case, handing over a piece to someone else to finish in that sense, part of that process not in your hands, literally and metaphorically. Uh, was that difficult to do, or was it because of where you were in that
Yes, but you see,
time?
I'm not professionally a sculptor, and
Mhm.
if and so in a way, this is the first and possibly the only time I would do sculpture. Shalini, of course, would be very happy to host me again, I'm sure, but it's unlikely that I will do it, and so I did what I could do, and I found that for this group of sculptures, I wanted a rough finish. In fact, for some of the larger sculptures during my second stay, I asked my assistants to build me a framework, which I described exactly, the way I wanted, the height and the width and everything. And then I started taking the clay and flinging it into that framework. And then I encouraged my assistants to fling the clay at the so that I got a wonderful surface, which was spontaneous at the same time very rough. Uh, then I just had to hand it over. Now, if I were a professional sculptor, then I might possibly want to do different kinds of sculptures where I might want a more polished surface and where I might want to be present when they are casting and when the work is finished, and I might want to polish it and all of that. This, of course, did not happen.
Uh, I'm looking at the time, and we do have about 10 minutes. Is anyone have a question? You can use the Zoom raise hands gesture if you're still busy typing it out. If not, then I'm going to ask Gieve to conclude with some of the poems that we kept to end the session with. I'm giving it 30 seconds for you folks to decide whether you have further questions to ask. All right. So Gieve, could you perhaps conclude this reading with as many other poems as you would like?
Thank you. This section of three poems is on servants. I think that in our country, the word servants has a very specific connotation, which it doesn't necessarily have in other countries, in wealthier countries, in countries where uh, the economic statuses of people are not so pronouncedly different as they are in our country. And so many of us, a large number of us from the middle class, even from the middle and lower middle class, from a very early age are exposed to the presence of servants. And they're very much part of our lives. And very few people have talked about this. To me, it is extremely important and always has been. So I'm going to read you 3 poems on servants. The first one is called Servants. They come of peasant stock, truant from an insufficient plot. Lights are shut off after dinner, but the city blur enters, picks modulations on the skin. The dark around them is brown and links body to body, or is dispelled, and the hard fingers glow as smoke is inhaled, and the lighted end of tobacco becomes an orange spot. Their hands are wide or shut. It does not matter one way or other. They sit without thought, mouth slightly open, recovering from the day, and the eyes globe into the dim, but are not informed because never have traveled beyond this silence. They sit like animals. I mean no offense. I have seen animals resting in their stall, the oil flame reflected in their eyes, large beads that, though protruding, actually rest behind the regular grind of the jaws. It's a very categorical poem called Entity. Entity. You know, one of the things I speak to my 13-year-old students at Rishi Valley about is how, what is the difference between something that is categorical and something that is suggestive, and how both these forces have their place in poetry. So here is my categorical poem, Entity. Original sin was the creation of an entity called servant. Servants are dark or light, almost always good to look at. They smile, often at you, sometimes vaguely at anyone. When they scowl, there is a barrage of words hurled at them, either before the scowl or after. I do not like to see them scowling. I want that to change. I want them to smile again. Fast! And the final servant poem, Dismissal. He stands awkwardly, sheepishly, to receive his last pay. The dog sidles up to him, thinking of their walk routine. But he is a scent the dog will soon forget. The child looks to him for attention. He half acknowledges the child, absent mindedly. He has other things to worry about. He will soon forget the child. The child will not forget him. The last three poems, I've, I've labeled the set Attempts at Mystical Insight. And these poems are a result of my meditation and my reading into mystical literature and my walks by myself and generally exploring the inner world. This poem is called The Place. People who are going for meditation are often told, always meditate in one place. It helps. I can't do that. So I try various places, and not even necessarily meditation, but even just to go deeper into oneself. And so this poem is an exploration of what it means to find that place and what that place could be. So it's called The Place. See now, well loved, we make too much of places where to meet, and why some should seem right, not others. The tryst is inward. Any atom on earth should do to sit by. But we fuss, we cavil, we make ponderous choices, rejecting that cool well side for no mortal reason, favoring instead a lumpy, dusty stone to sit upon as the one spot we had been urgently seeking. And it isn't as though we were ascetics. Outright beauty too has pleased us, like that seashore, dense with moonlight, igniting water, sand, and air into a blind shimmer. Our recurrent wrangling, the one division, to mar that place's simple perfection. And again, unsolemn prayer, starting out with a sort of fairly light-hearted way of addressing the Lord as somebody who has doubtful goodness, but certainly has lots of beauty. And then it goes on. Unsolemn prayer. Monsignor, I don't know about your goodness, but your beauty floors me. If that was your face I saw, I am all praise for it. Oh, doubly glorious in turbulence. Below me, clouds dashed against the mountainside like an absolute sea, tearing through the greenery in waves, with breathless glimpses of a serene, lighted valley under the grey. the last poem. And this poem plays upon this idea that is written in much mystical literature about how the divinity is as hungry for us as we are for the divinity. And so the poem is called You Too. You Too. Don't think I am new to this Dumbo game. I've seen it in and out. So if you give me glancing, searing looks and then look away for weeks, if you let drop a loaded word and carry on thenceforth as though you never had said it, if you hint to me that you are jealous of my other affections, then cling yourself to your own friends in full view of my jealous eyes. Remember, I will remain unmoved. Who better than you to know I've been lashed before on this trip, all too often to care. Hints, looks, gestures, fleeting, teasing offers of friendship, then cool withdrawal. Oh, drown it all in your oceans. My smarting tears leave no mighty seas behind. Maybe it's true what they say about you. Who knows if infatuations galore don't torment you too, and you weep in hunger for the world. Thank you.
So let me just ask you one last question. When will we next see a collection of your poetry out in public?
Oh, the collection is out. It is called Collected Poems, and it was published in 2017. And
No, I meant after that. When are you doing it?
well, you know,
Perhaps look forward to?
as I said, Peter, I'm such a slow worker.
Yeah, I was just going back. 2017, perhaps all the poems won't take on 12 years. So 27 seemed reasonable to ask whether there's a new volume in the works.
No, there's not.
Okay. So in that case, Dr. Patel, thank you so much for giving us this reading. Folks in the audience, there will be a recording of this out eventually on Prakriti's channel. Dr. Patel will also have a copy for himself in a temporary home, which is on Prakriti Foundation's Google Drive. Thank you all the folks in the audience for making the time to come and attend a poetry session on a Saturday evening. We hope that all of you are keeping safe, keeping healthy, isolating, not being silly about not wearing masks in public and such like that, because we do hope to be able to have a live and in-person Poetry with Prakriti by the time we get around to this next year. In the meanwhile, this is a lovely way to bring poetry to people all over the world, on their computer screens, on their phones. And for that, thank you, Prakriti Foundation. Thank you, Meera, and thank you, Harish, for all the hard work you do to bring these sessions together. Thank you very much. Next week, folks, we will have the other ongoing series right now, which is a retrospective of the plays and performance pieces by Manjula Padmanabhan. There was a two-volume set of her theatrical works, which was published last year, which over the course of last year and this year, the last Saturday of every month, there will be a new director every session who will interpret one of Manjula's works in, it could be a staged reading, it could be a visual interpretation, each one will come up with something different. These take place on the last Saturday of every month. So if you're a member of various Prakriti's various forums, or if you follow on social media, keep an eye out for the registration link, and we do hope to see you there. We'll be back with poetry on the first 3 Saturdays of next month, as usual, with a new poet every time. So thank you, audience. Thank you, Prakriti Foundation, for keeping the series going. And thank you very much, Gieve Patel. It has been a privilege to talk to you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Prakriti. And thank you, audience, for taking your time to come and listen to me.
Bye, folks. So, Dr. Patel, you can hit the leave button now.
Yes.
Hey, Hamish, are you still there?
Yes,
Thank you,
yes,
Hamish.
yes, 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 yes. You are the host.
Okay.
You
Just
can
get-
just hold.
Yeah.
Let me stop.